Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name is Tom Press. I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com. Thanks for tuning in this morning. It's my pleasure to be here to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Vatican Billions by Avro, Manhattan. Most important book for those who are seriously seeking after the truth about the biblical Antichrist, the Vatican, the papacy, the biblical Antichrist. And this book outlines the rise of Antichrist in the world throughout its history, from beginning to the current date, and outlining its growth from just a mere bishop in Italy to a controlling financial colossus that it is today. Now, we're talking about a period of time in the 1930s when many communist factions had arisen and were despoiling the Roman Catholic Church of her landed property, her landed wealth, and even threatening the church. And we'll back up a couple paragraphs from where we were last week, and we'll continue now. It says, if you're following along, I'm on page 132 of the book, the second full paragraph, right in the middle of the page. It says, in the eyes of the Vatican, the continuation of such instability, we're talking about this political instability, particularly communism, godless communism that was threatening the Roman Catholic Church, is this, it endangered not only the spiritual interests of the church, but also her earthly riches. A large portion of these had already gone. For in 1931, the Spanish Republic did exactly what the French and Russians had already done during their revolutions: dispossessed the Roman Catholic Church of all of her property. One of the Republic's first actions, in fact, had been to despoil the Jesuits of everything they owned. Can I hear an amen from my listeners, right? It says their possessions had not been limited to small parcels that would enable the poor of Christ to plant soybeans, nor were they designed solely to provide for destitute widows and orphans. The church was the largest, richest landlord in the whole of Spain, even larger than the decadent aristocracy with which she had been so intimately linked that often it was difficult to distinguish one from another. The Republic impartially dispossessed both of their goods, with the result that it found itself with no less than 13 million acres of land. They robbed the Roman Catholic Church of 13 million acres of land. I wonder how much they owned. Maybe you'll tell us here. 13 million acres of land, which the government parsed out in small holdings to about 1 million peasants. It says the property of the Roman Catholic Church in Spain at this period, along about 1933, was, according to John Gunther, worth no less than $500 million, most of this being controlled by the Jesuits. When the Spanish Republic confiscated the vast holdings, it was officially confirmed that they were worth 6,000 million pesetas, in other words, 6 billion pesetas. And before the inflation which followed, this meant a worth of more than $1 billion more dollars. This colossal sum, it must be remembered, was what remained after the Roman Catholic Church property had already been substantially reduced by wicked legislators during the previous century. When Spain went through one of two bouts of anti-clericalism, in other words, anti-priest, they were sick and fed up with the Roman Catholic Church. This is a Catholic country, ladies and gentlemen. Spain is Roman Catholic. The Roman Catholic Church is hated by Roman Catholics. And it says, in the old days, it had been estimated that the church owned or controlled between 80 and 90% of all the accumulated wealth of the Iberian Peninsula. That's Spain and Portugal. 80 or 90% of the accumulated wealth of the whole of France, or Spain and Portugal. And it said by the start of the First World War, this had been cut down to 60%. Still a whopping amount of control by the Roman Catholic Church. Now, picking up where we left off at the end of the broadcast Friday, it says, no wonder then that in 1936, when Mussolini, fascist Mussolini, went to war in Africa, and the Popular Front in France was threatening religion and church property, the Vatican sided with the little-known general who in that time revolted against the Spanish government in Madrid. His name? General Franco. The Spanish Civil War had begun. Whether the Spanish Republic deserved to die, whether it was the forerunner of anarchism and eventually of Bolshevism, whether Franco was right or wrong to rebel against Republican weakness, ineptitude, and demagoguery, it is for history to judge. One incontrovertible fact, however, is clear. The Roman Catholic Church supported the rebellion to the hilt. She actually sponsored it. Indeed, she was one of the most important agencies in hatching and prompting it. The motive that prompted her to do this was not only the safeguarding of her spiritual monopoly, but also and above all, the retention of her immense temporal wealth, a veritable stranglehold on the economic and financial life of the nation. Quote, its cardinal sin is that it is rich in a land of poverty, unquote, commented a Catholic paper, a Roman Catholic newspaper. The cardinal sin of the Roman Catholic Church is that it is rich in a land of poverty. Now, this was referring to the Catholic Church in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. Following almost 4 years of bloody civil slaughter from 1936 to 1939, and the Holocaust of nearly 1 million dead, she's guilty of the blood of all the slain of the earth, says the Bible. She's guilty of at least 1 million dead in this civil war. And it says, finally, the nationalist forces won. The Roman Catholic Church chanted Te Deums all over the Iberian Peninsula. Her $1 billion property was no longer threatened. It belonged to her still. The Lord be praised, says the author. Now, chapter 18 of the book is entitled The Total Wealth of the Church Before and During the Second World War. More war. The Vatican is the church militant. She foments the wars of the world. It says the Spanish Civil War was no sooner ended than the Second War broke out in September of 1939. The former, though ferocious and beset by dangerous international intervention by the Russian communists, the Italian fascists, the Nazis, the International Brigade, the Popular Front, and others, had by and large been fought and won within the Spanish borders. The Roman Catholic Church had saved her immense wealth there. But what now that Hitler was challenging the whole of Europe? Where did she stand as regards her political and economic power outside the Iberian Peninsula? The papacy, although apprehensive, seemed to have little fear. Hitler, notwithstanding periodical minor quarrels with the German Catholic hierarchy, had never threatened to deprive the Roman Catholic Church of her wealth. And as you remember the book that we previously read, Behind the Dictators, it was an intimate relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. And we're going to touch on that more as we continue here. It says, on the contrary, he had ensured the Roman Catholic property and stability within the Nazi Reich by a solemn treaty, The Concordat signed between Hitler and the Pope in June of 1933, only a few months after Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January. So it was a priority with Hitler to sign a Concordat, wasn't it? A Concordat with the Roman Catholic Church to preserve the Roman Catholic Church in the Nazi Reich. And it says this happy state of affairs was due to the fundamental fact that the Roman Catholic Church and Nazism had agreed to support each other. I remind you of a passage of Scripture. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. Here's an example. And it says, while Hitler guaranteed the Vatican her property and sundry special privileges, the Roman Catholicism ordered her clergy to take an oath of fealty to Nazism. Here's the Roman Catholic Church, political wheels a turning. She's going into the Second World War. She's going in behind Hitler's Nazi Germany, and the church is praying for the Nazi regime. It says prayers were said publicly for Nazi Germany. The Roman Catholic bishops made all Roman Catholic priests swear that they would never oppose or harm the Nazi dictatorship. It was the same kind of formal marriage as that contracted with fascist Italy only 4 years before. Considered in the light of the above, therefore, no matter how bad Hitler was going to be, basically he would be useful, insofar he was the opposite of Stalin, the embodiment of Bolshevism, who sought to annihilate the Roman Catholic Church and seize all of her property. Hitler set out to destroy not only Stalin, but also Russian and European Bolshevism. Hence, war or no war, he became the most effective defender of the Roman Catholic Church, and therefore of all her billions. Such reasoning, seen from the Vatican's self-interest, seems sound, and that is why its main promoter, Cardinal Pacelli, later to become Pope Pius XII, pursued a policy of direct and indirect support for the two most vigorous anti-communist extreme right movements of the period, Italian fascism and German Nazism, from the very beginning. The Vatican went so far as to pave the way for Hitler, indeed to compel dissident German Catholics to toe the Vatican Hitlerian line. The 4 milestones of such policy were established. Number 1, when the leader of the German Catholic Party, Franz von Papen, was named Vice Chancellor of Nazi Germany, second only to Hitler himself, in January of 1933. So there is the Roman Catholic leader of the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Party in Germany becoming Vice Chancellor to Nazi Hitler. And number 2, when the deputies of the Catholic Party in Parliament voted for the granting of absolute power to Hitler. So Hitler's absolutism came from the Roman Catholic Church. And number 3, when the Vatican gave orders to the German Center Party, that was the Roman Catholic Party in Germany, gave orders for them to dissolve so as to remove any political opposition to Hitler, which it immediately did on the 5th of July, 1933. And last but not least, number 4, when the Vatican and Hitler signed a Concordat in the summer of 1933, and according to Article 20 of this Concordat, here's a quote, on Sundays, special prayers will be offered for the welfare of the German Reich, unquote. That's right in the Concordat. That Sundays in the Roman Catholic Church, the Sabbath of Catholics, Sunday, the first day of the week, will be a day dedicated to prayer for the Nazi German Reich. Now, even more serious was Article 16, quote, before bishops take possession of their diocese, they are to take an oath of fealty to the Reich representative. That's right, the shadow government, the bishop of the dioceses, the diocesan bishops, were to swear an allegiance to Hitler and his Nazi regime. Strange bedfellows, you think? Well, the union between the Roman Catholic Church, strange bedfellows as we might perceive them to be, was the reason why so many people died in the Second World War. And we're all aware of how many Jews died. We're all educated about how many Jews died, but how many Protestants died? This was a religious war, as we're going to continue to discover. And Jews weren't the only target. I take nothing away from the suffering of the Jews. God's people are to know that Rome hates the Jews. She has a policy of replacement theology, that somehow the Roman Catholic Church has replaced the Jews and are now God's chosen people. And to seal that deal, they set out to destroy every Jew on the planet. And I maintain today that the Vatican is responsible for the creation of the modern nation-state of Israel, and it is responsible for the First World War and the Second World War to persecute and prosecute and to kill Jews in order to force them down to their final destruction in Israel. And I believe the United States government is just as guilty as Nazi Germany government for making this happen. The ultimate responsibility lies with the Vatican. It's the Vatican's final question. What about the Jews? And we're seeing the destruction of Jews in Israel today. It's all man-made. This is not a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. This is not an act of God. The creation of the modern nation-state of Israel is a Vatican creation, and it bodes horrors for the Jews in the world. And no less responsible for this is the government of the United States of America, particularly the State Department. This so-called peace plan, roadmap peace plan, it's a cooperative effort between the Vatican, the United States government, and the Israeli government to keep the Jews in a state of perpetual war so that they will eventually sue for peace at any price, and that is to receive a counterfeit Messiah. And that's what Rome has in store for the Jews. And we all need to be on our knees in prayer that somehow the Jews would see the light of Christ and come out in abject obedience to the Messiah whom they slew 2,000 years ago. Their salvation is in Christ, not the Pope, not the Vatican, not the United States or any other man-made organization. If there's any hope and help for the Jews, it's for their Messiah, Christ Jesus. Yes, the Roman Catholic Church insisted that Sundays would be dedicated for special prayers for the welfare of the German Nazi Hitlerian Reich. And it said even more serious was Article 16, quote, before bishops, that's the shadow government of Nazi Germany, just like it is the shadow government of the United States, the diocesan bishops, before they took possession of their dioceses, they were to take an oath of fealty to the Reich representative, unquote. And it says all the details of this policy were first made public by the present author in his book, The Vatican in World Politics. Another book that I highly recommend, one that we'll get to eventually on this program, The Vatican in World Politics by Avro Manhattan. Now, seen retrospectively, the Vatican-Hitlerian collaboration looks like a colossal misjudgment on the part of the papacy. Yet at that period, the menace of communism in the domestic and international field was real, pressing the imminent. Communism was endangering not only religion, but also the wealth of established religion, including all the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church. At the outbreak of the Second World War, therefore, the Church had no hesitation as to where it stood. Of course, as a faith which had adherents on both sides on both sides, just as she always does. Remember, she operates on both sides of every Hegelian dialectic, and that is to manage the outcome. Just like she is the principal controller in both the Democratic and Republican parties in this country, she worked on both sides of the line of the conflict during the Second World War. And it says the Catholic Church had to play the official role of neutrality. That's why the Roman Catholic Church always has to appear, at least outwardly and publicly, as a neutral party in all conflicts, when in actuality she foments these conflicts for her benefit and operates on both sides of each conflict to manage the outcome, while she publicly stands the peacemaker. And the world buys this lie like it's built in. When are we ever going to wake up? And it says the Roman Catholic Church could not antagonize hundreds of millions of Catholics in France, Belgium, Holland, Poland, England, and above all, the United States. You know, you can't, you have to maintain your base. That's why the Vatican can piously stand up before the cameras and plead for peace and negotiations on both sides. That's so as not to wake up her Catholic laity to the reality of the control that the Vatican has in these conflicts. And it says, but while playing the role of universal father, another term of blasphemy, Pope Pius XII was supporting the Hitlerian crusade up to the hilt, as did the various Catholic countries outside the Allied field. The Hitlerian war, seen from Rome, was essentially an anti-Bolshevik crusade. When, therefore, in June of 1941, Hitler crossed the Russian frontiers, there was open rejoicing at the Vatican. Prayers, novenas, and the cult of Fatima, based on the Virgin's promise that, quote, the Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, unquote, were all revived and magnified. To help the Vatican's promise come true, no less than to make it possible for Pope Pius XII to consecrate Russia to her, Catholic countries sent contingents to the Russian front. Catholic Spain sent her Blue Division alongside the Nazi armies, and volunteers flocked thither from practically all Catholic countries. While this was taking place, Franco set out to revive his half-destroyed land. This he did by restoring the fortunes of the Vatican in war-torn Spain. Thus, on January 27, 1940, he signed a decree formally restoring the vast property holdings of the Society of Jesus, which had been confiscated by the Republic in 1932. At the same time, he also restored all lands which either the 1931 Republic or the Loyalists had taken over from the Catholic Church. To the Vatican, this was a great victory. Its billions had been returned to its coffers. The nationalist government started to rebuild. So did the Roman Catholic Church. She did this by buying more property, by investing in more real estate, blocks of flats, even buying shares in factories, and by searching frantically for the millions of pesetas that had been lost during the Civil War. Yes, she was heavily invested even before the war. Now, we're talking about the time when Spain had restored all the Vatican's properties. Rome was again in control in Catholic Spain. It says to the Vatican this was a great victory. Its billions had returned to its coffers. The nationalist government started to rebuild, and so did the Roman Catholic Church. She did this by buying more property, by investing in real estate, blocks of flats, even buying shares in factories, and by searching frantically for the millions of pesetas which she had lost during the Civil War. Stocks and bonds. Now, it says, during the Civil War, hundreds of millions of pesetas and of dollars worth of stocks and bonds had either been confiscated or, having been hidden in safe places, had been forgotten, lost, or stolen. The Spanish hierarchy used every available means at their disposal to retrieve the riches of this world, with zeal usually unmatched when dealing with the treasures of the next. It says they mobilized experts at home and abroad. They went so far as to use that most indignified lay commercial vehicle, newspaper advertising. And so it came to pass that the business-minded prelates of the Roman Catholic Church early in 1940 began to place advertisements in sundry newspapers giving numbers and other details of the missing shares, and their efforts were crowned with success. The triumph, however, was a mixed one. For Roman Catholics now, to their surprise, came to know with exactitude how their church, seemingly so concerned only with the riches of heaven and with moral principles, had been and was still no less concerned with the riches she had held in banks, telephone companies, steamship companies, and other such unspiritual concerns long before the Civil War had begun, and this after her numberless disclaimers during the conflict that she had any temporal interests at all. Amazing, isn't it? The Roman Catholics of Spain were surprised that the Vatican was so heavily invested in temporal affairs. Do you suppose we might be just as much deceived as the Spanish Catholics in Spain? On January 7th, 1940, for instance, the newspaper ABC came out with an item listing stocks in the Compañía Telefónica Nacional de España, and on January 24th, another item listed stocks in the Compañía Transatlántica. That's a shipping company, telephone company, and shipping. And it says the interesting feature of this was not only that the Spanish Church had invested in such lay concerns, but that she had financial interests in international ones. For whereas the second was connected with the Spanish Transatlantic Steamship Company, the first was part and parcel of the American International Telephone and Telegraph Company, which incidentally built the first skyscraper in Spain. The IT&T did not say that it was the Vatican that owned the stock, not even that it belonged to the hierarchy. The Vatican is too skillful a master in the games of this world to allow that. As in Italy, the United States, and other countries, most of her property, shares, and bonds are camouflaged behind the names of individual Catholic laymen, or even purely financial or banking or industrial concerns. Banking, financial, and industrial concerns. That's where Rome hides her money. And behind individual Roman Catholic lay people, the Vatican's wealth is not apparent because it's hidden. Rome doesn't want the world to know how wealthy she is. And it says in this case, however, the certificates declared that besides laymen, there were also clearly hierarchs on the financial bandwagon, like the Metropolitan of Valencia, for instance, who owned several hundred shares of telephone stock. The Casa Diocesan of the Archbishop of Lerida owned 14 shares of preferred stock, while the rector of the College of San Jose of Valencia together with the Jesuits, the College of Maria the Immaculate, and sundry other Catholic congregations, owned the remainder. So the Roman Catholic Church owned all the preferred stock in the telephone company. Now, some of the holders of stocks in the steamship line were the Archbishop of Madrid Alcala, that was 50 shares, and the Vicar General of the Congregation of Hermanos Descalzos de la Retzera Orden, it's a long, difficult name to pronounce here. We'll just let it go and say this was an institution from Tarragona. It says the church owned more or less 1/3 of the total wealth of Spain. Well, let me say again, listen to this. The Roman Catholic Church, now this is after she'd been despoiled and had part of her wealth restored. It said the Roman Catholic Church owned more or less 1/3 of the total wealth of Spain, movable and immovable. And it says to cite only a few of the concerns in which she had total or partial financial interest, here are a few at random quoted in La España Circle, with apparently a Spanish magazine. Here's the quote. It says, the North Railroad, the Transatlantic Steamship Company. You get the idea that Rome's preoccupied with shipping and commerce? Yes, indeed. Just read Revelation chapter 18 and see all the things that she trades in. The Bible's not a fictitious book. We can read Revelation chapter 18 and then read this book and we can see the facts on the ground. And this is way back in 1930. Imagine how much her commerce has risen since, and especially since the publishing of the papal encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, charity and truth. You know what that charity and truth means? The forced redistribution of the United States wealth. That's what it means. And not just the United States, but that of the whole world. The Vatican has set itself up as the world's Robin Hood. And it's the so-called moral purpose of the Vatican now to level the playing field, to take from the rich nations of the world and give to the poor, to be the savior of the poor in the world. The Vatican has set itself up to be the world's Robin Hood. Forced redistribution of wealth. And the evidence is plain if you know what to look for. All these free trade agreements, NAFTA and GATT, they were all implemented as an answer to the Pope's social doctrine. That's an official body of study in the Roman Catholic Church. Social justice. And this is her answer. The forced redistribution of the world's wealth. Commerce and shipping. The quote again, she was heavily invested in the North Railroad, the Transatlantic Steamship Company, the orange groves of Andalusia, the mines of the Basque provinces. She's heavy into heavy metal. The mines of Basque provinces and the Rif, and dozens of factories, manufacturing, in Catalan, and under the church's open or occult direction. Okay, all of these industries were controlled by the Vatican either openly or secretly. And you thought it was just a church. I've got news for you. It's not a church, and it's not the Church of Jesus Christ by any stretch of the imagination. It is the Church of Antichrist, the synagogue of Satan. And that knowledge is not new. That was known by the Protestant reformers before this day and age of commercial enterprise. Now, To believe, however, that the Roman Catholic Church was recovering, amassing, and multiplying her millions only in Spain before and during the war would be a mistake, for she was being equally active in other countries. For instance, Belgium, Holland, Poland, and France. In the last named country, France, for example, the Vatican used to control the Franco-Italian Bank of South America, which had a capital of 40 million francs. That's pre-Second World War figures. The Society de Textiles du Nord, there's a textile enterprise, in which Vatican participation amounted to 70% of the capital, and similar profitable investments, to such an extent that the total stockholding participation of the Vatican at that time was estimated at 200 million francs in the buying value of the time of acquisition. That was 1939 to 1940. Besides this, the Vatican, while relying on the Nazi armies to protect its wealth and from the communists at home and abroad, nevertheless deemed it wise to project its financial interests across the ocean. Thus, long before the outbreak of the Second World War, it had already taken the first successful steps to implement such a precautionary and lucrative enterprise. It began to invest not only in South American countries, but also in Protestant USA. Protestant USA. She's investing in Protestant USA. Do you suppose she might have the idea of conquest? Well, let me tell you something. She's ready to launch the Second World War. She knows the United States is a war-mongering manufacturer of sophisticated weapons. And where best to invest your money than in a nation that you plan to inject into that war? Rome knows all the angles. She calls all the shots. She knows where to invest her money. She knows what she's fomenting in the world, and she seeks to profit by all these wars that she foments. She's heavily invested in Protestant USA. Now it says this was known at the time. It says what came as a surprise after the Second World War was the volume of the Vatican's investment there. The extent of the Vatican's participation in big business came to light before hostilities ended, when certain documents fell into the hands of the Italian socialist leaders. These proved that the Vatican had invested very heavily throughout North America, and although they could not tell the whole story, owing to the Vatican's policy of disguising her holdings behind a screen of Catholic and even non-Catholic lay concerns, yet one valuation arrived at by means of reliable criteria placed the amount of the Vatican stock holding in the United States at between 700 and 800 million Italian lira at 1939 values. This, it must be noted, without counting her property, which we shall scrutinize in more detail shortly. At the same time, the Vatican invested in the South and Central American republics. In some of these, she controlled colossal wealth, represented by land, real estate, commercial enterprises, banking, buildings, stocks, and bonds. It was estimated that before and immediately after the Second World War, the Vatican's wealth in Europe, represented by stocks, bonds, shares, and the like, was more than 3 billion lira. 3 billion with a B, expressed always in the values of the lira in 1939, or 120 billion in 1969 value of the lira. And since we're dealing with Italian currency, it might be appropriate to add the sums above the approximate amount of the Vatican's riches in Italy itself, as represented either directly or indirectly by her ownership of land and real estate in that country. The valuation of houses, buildings, and lands held by her through the religious orders, that's the Franciscans, the Dominicans, all the religious orders, Religious institutes and the like would be 4,000 million lira. That's 4 billion lira in 1939 values, or 190,000 million, $190 billion at lira, that is, at the 1960 exchange. When, therefore, Hitler lost the war in 1945 and Europe lay in ruins, her material, political, and financial structures battered, and with Hitler's Red Battalions occupying a third of the continent, the Vatican, grateful to God that the Russian Bolsheviks had not planted the red flag on the Dome of St. Peter's, could still look to the future with understandable assurance and indeed confidence. For while relying upon the protection of the Lord, it felt even more confident that such spiritual protection became more formidable when strengthened by the solid billions in liquid assets, lands, real estate, and industrial stock which it had so providentially amassed in the Old and especially in the New World. You call this providence? Not at all. This is not God. This is not God that heaps land and wealth upon the Roman Catholic Church. Chapter 19 of the book is entitled, "The Vatican Invests Millions in War Industries, Transfers most of them to the United States of America." This is why she invested in the United States, to participate in the war industry. She's a warrior. She calls herself the church militant. And when there's money to be made in war, she invests heavily. She not only wins the conquest of war, strengthens her church, adds to her millions and millions and millions of acres of land through conquest, she profits by the manufacture of bullets. It says a Vatican bank, Istituto per l'Opera Religione, was set up with one basic objective. We have a bank, a Vatican bank being set up for one basic objective. Quote, to keep and administer the capital intended for religious congregations, unquote. If there was a classic camouflage behind which to carry on activities that had nothing whatsoever to do with those apparently intended, here it was. Since at the time of its foundation, the Instituto's specific task was simply to transfer Roman Catholic Church capital and money out of beleaguered Europe. The bank was founded in 1942 by Pope Pius XII at the height of the Second World War, when Hitler, after having successfully reached the outskirts of Moscow, got stuck there, and to His Holiness's chagrin, could not budge. Yeah, Hitler got in a little trouble there in Russia and wasn't going forward or backward, so Pope Pius XII bailed and started exporting its wealth and investments out of Europe and into this country. It says Pope Pius XII, though still confident of a Hitlerian victory, began to have his first secret doubts concerning the final outcome of the war. For the overall picture of hostilities had greatly changed since their inception. The United States had been brought into the battlefield. The mounting impetus of the American initiative and energy had already begun to affect the balance of power. U.S. armaments, men, and industrial might were being felt everywhere. Unless a miracle happened, Hitler might lose the war after all. In view of the changing circumstances, therefore, the best policy was to help Providence. You have to help God, of course, if you're in the Roman Catholic Church. The best policy was to help Providence to take precautionary steps concerning the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church by transferring it to safer shores, for instance. And where could these mobile riches find safety better than within the distant borders of the United States of America? After all, supposing that God had abandoned Hitler, his designs were inscrutable, what then? Stalin and his Bolshevik hordes might sweep through all of Europe. What, they might enter even Rome. If the Allies prevented that, since it was not in their interest to see the Russians in Western Europe, what could they do if the Italian communists set up a communist dictatorship in Italy? Nothing. A communist Italy or France or Germany would mean one certain thing: the dispossession of all the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church within the country. It was with this in mind that Pius XII founded the Instituto, the bank, a clever move to safeguard the Vatican's financial interests. For the Instituto, while cleverly integrated within the ecclesiastical machinery of the Roman Catholic Church, it has to hide behind the cloak of religion, right? And to all appearances and purposes, a purely religious institution, plausible and logical in reality, at this stage, at any rate, was nothing more than a flexible instrument for arranging multiple financial activities. What did all this mean in the middle of the war? It meant, as an authoritative organ explained, that, quote, this bank allowed the Holy See to undertake transfers across closed frontiers, and it profited richly from the rare privilege of being able to transfer foreign exchange in a partitioned world, unquote. The partitioned world was truly partitioned by millions of armed men, by closed frontiers, by barbed wire, by bombers, by tanks, by submarines. Nobody could pass. And that applied to generals, politicians, diplomats, and heads of state. There was one exception, however: the representatives of the Vatican. For them, there were no such restrictions. As the envoys of a religion and the delegates of a sovereign city-state, the official neutral Vatican City, they could come and go at their pleasure from one belligerent country to another, from one continent to another, from battling Europe to Canada, the United States and South America. The carriers of spiritual comfort, but even more the carriers of banknotes, stocks, bonds, gold and silver. She had a free rein to travel, because you can't question the operations of the Vatican. It's a religious institution, a Christian religious institution. It's a peace lover. It's to be trusted, and it's to be respected above all else. What a horror our ignorance has brought us.